Alice stood outside the towering Miller Enterprises building, staring up at its sleek glass facade. She caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection. Her once blue jeans had faded into a sad shade of gray. Her fabric backpack looked more like a worn-out grocery bag, and her hair, better not even think about it. "All right, this will work. Just a girl on a mission," she whispered, trying to pump herself up. The plan was simple. Get inside, deliver a letter to Thomas Miller, and get out unnoticed. Easy, right? Wrong. First hurdle, the revolving door. Alice stepped in confidently, but immediately got stuck, spinning herself in the wrong direction. By the time she finally escaped, she stumbled out and crashed right into the receptionist's desk, knocking over a cup full of pens. "Hi, I'm here to deliver a letter," she announced, as if nothing unusual had happened. The receptionist, who looked like she had walked straight out of a fashion magazine, slowly looked Alice up and down, her expression screaming. "How did you get in here? Appointment? Badge? Invitation? Secret code?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I have a letter," Alice repeated, as if that explained everything. "It's urgent. For Thomas Miller. Just need a second." The receptionist didn't even blink. She pressed an unseen button, and within seconds, a security guard appeared, built like a four-door wardrobe. "No badge, no entry," he declared. Alice glanced at the letter, then at the security guard, then at the elevator that had just opened. Without thinking, she let out a small squeak and bolted inside before the doors could close. "Hey, come back here," the security guard shouted, lunging forward, but Alice had already disappeared. Inside the elevator, she crashed into a man carrying a tray of coffee, ending up with cappuccino foam in her hair. Panicking, she randomly pressed a button and hoped for the best. When the doors opened, she found herself in a room buzzing with activity. People wearing headsets, cables running everywhere, giant screens lighting up the space. "Okay, Alice, just blend in," she whispered to herself. 2 steps in, she tripped over a box, knocked over a stack of promotional gifts, got her pant leg caught on a long strip of tape, and nearly took down a studio light. "Who is that?" someone in a headset murmured. "Probably a cleaner, or a delivery person, or a lost soul," another voice guessed. "Did someone lose a cousin in the elevator?" A cameraman joked. Looking for an escape, Alice spotted a large door at the end of the hall. "Must be a waiting area," she thought. Without hesitation, she pushed it open and slipped right onto an expensive rug, smacking her hip against the desk, landing on her knees, right in front of Thomas Miller. He was reading a serious document and slowly turned around, expecting to see an executive, or at least a courier. Instead, he found Alice, messy-haired, on her knees, holding out a letter like an overdue tax bill. "I knew today was going to be strange, but this," he muttered, staring at her like she was a mirage. Alice scrambled to her feet, so fast she hit her knee on the desk. "Ow!" But she forced a smile, acting as if everything was completely normal. "Hi, I'm Alice. I have a letter for you." She stretched her arm out so forcefully, it looked like she was trying to reach across the desk. Thomas folded his arms. "That explains why you just ran into my office like you were fleeing the police." "Oh yes, I can explain." Alice quickly fixed her hair, trying to look professional. "I thought this was the bathroom." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "The bathroom?" "Yes, but it's not. So, since I was already here, I figured I'd just hand you the letter." He looked unimpressed. "And do you usually enter bathrooms on your knees?" "No, that was because I was testing the rug. Very soft, by the way. Congratulations." "And the letter?" "Oh, right." Alice handed it over. "It's from my mentor. He asked me to deliver it personally. And since I'm a very dedicated, professional person, I thought sneaking in would be faster than explaining things at reception." Thomas took a deep breath. "So you thought breaking into one of the most secure buildings in the city was a professional idea?" "I really did." Alice nodded earnestly. "I was so focused on the mission, like a ninja messenger. Also, the receptionist gave me a weird look, and I panicked. And, well, here we are." Thomas studied her, then the letter. "And your mentor is?" Alice blinked. "Oh, right, Zion Kwan. Almost forgot. And you are what to him? Kind of his apprentice, or honorary niece, or divine punishment, depending on his mood, she said with a grin. Thomas stared at her for a moment then, much to Alice's confusion, started laughing. Not just a polite chuckle, a real full laugh. Alice frowned. Are you okay? I swear I didn't write anything weird in the letter. I didn't insult anyone. She trailed off as Thomas shook his head, still laughing. It's just hard to imagine Zion Quan having an apprentice like you. Delivering such an important letter through someone else felt risky, so Thomas searched for the right words. Before he could find them, Alice finished his sentence for him. So unreliable, she laughed at herself. Relax, he says that all the time. Before Thomas could respond, the office door burst open. A frantic-looking assistant in a suit rushed in. Mr. Miller, we need you in the main hall. The launch event for the new product line starts in 5 minutes, and the spokesperson is missing. Missing. Thomas closed his eyes, already feeling a headache coming on. Alice, sensing the chaos, immediately jumped up from her chair. I can help, she blurted out, having no idea what the event was even about. Thomas narrowed his eyes. Alice, this event is being streamed live to hundreds of investors. It's not some small-town talent show. Hey, I once hosted a charity bingo night in my neighborhood. I'm practically a pro, she said, hands on her hips like she was born for the stage. Out of time and out of options, Thomas gestured to the assistant. Take her. Anything's better than having no one up there. 5 minutes later, Alice stood backstage, surrounded by a whirlwind of nervous staff. Makeup artists darted around, dabbing powder on her face with the gentleness of a construction worker sanding a wall. A producer barked into a microphone. Can someone tell me what I have to do? Alice asked. Just go in, smile, present the product, and walk out. No improvising, warned a woman with a headset. No improvising? Alice mumbled. That's going to be tough. No one heard her. Then her name, well, not even her real name, was announced. Alice walked onto the stage. The bright lights blinded her for a second. The audience, full of serious-looking people in suits clutching champagne glasses like expensive accessories, expected a polished, professional presentation. Alice tripped on the first step. Grabbing the microphone stand for balance, she accidentally yanked a cable, sending half of the digital banner behind her crashing down. A collective groan rippled through the room. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of finance, she began, smiling nervously. My name is, well, actually, it's Alice, but apparently there's a typo on my badge. Anyway, tonight we're here to introduce the new line of... She glanced at the screen, which was now displaying a Windows screensaver. The cutting-edge, state-of-the-art respiratory innovation, or something like that. She finished with an awkward chuckle. At the back of the room, Thomas put a hand on his forehead, but to his surprise, he was laughing, really laughing. Alice kept talking, completely uncensored. She showed the wrong product, mixed up percentage figures, and, as a grand finale, got her pant leg caught on a lighting stand while exiting the stage, knocking over even more equipment. It was a disaster, or at least, it should have been. Instead, the guests, used to stiff, predictable events, found it hilarious. They started recording and posting it on social media. Within hours, the most clumsy spokesperson in history was going viral. After the event, Thomas found Alice sitting in the hallway, shoes in her hands, looking like she had just run a marathon of embarrassment. I told you I was a professional, she said with a small smile. A professional at causing chaos, Thomas replied, arms crossed, but an amused sparkle in his eyes. Seriously, I'm sorry. I was just trying to help. The letter was important, and I guess I got carried away, she admitted. If you want, I can disappear now. Thomas studied her. She was a walking disaster, a tornado of honesty and improvisation, everything he wasn't used to. And yet, tomorrow, you start working here, he said. Alice's eyes widened. Are you sure? I nearly brought your whole building down today. Consider it a survival program for my employees, he joked. You said you wanted to deliver the letter in person because you were reliable. Let's see if that's true. Alice jumped to her feet, excited. "I promise I'll be the best, whatever my job title is," she said, extending her hand. Thomas shook it, feeling, for the first time in years, that something, or someone, was about to turn his predictable world upside down. The next morning, Alice showed up with a backpack nearly bigger than she was, stuffed with snacks, notebooks, and even a flashlight, which she insisted she might need. As she passed reception, she waved at the receptionist with a victorious grin. "I'm back, sweetheart." "Is this really happening?" the woman muttered in disbelief. Up in the executive office, Alice was given a makeshift desk next to the copier. Her job? Help wherever needed. "Alice, can you organize these contracts alphabetically?" an assistant asked. "Of course," she said. "Wait, is that with A or C?" Within 2 hours, Alice had managed to spill coffee on the printer, answer a call thinking it was the intercom, and set off the fire alarm while trying to open a drawer. Each time something happened, Thomas was informed. And each time, instead of being frustrated, he found himself laughing. Alice had no idea, but her unintentional chaos was bringing something to Miller Enterprises that had been missing for a long time: life. And for Thomas, this clumsy woman was the most interesting thing to shake up his perfectly structured world. Now officially employed, Alice looked at her makeshift desk as if she had just won the lottery. Sure, it was technically just a repurposed shelf next to the copier, but she placed a tiny $3 succulent on it for a personal touch. "A palace of my own," she sighed happily. Then, the printer next to her suddenly went haywire, spitting out paper nonstop, like a possessed machine. Alice pressed buttons, blew on the sensor, even gave it a gentle tap, but nothing worked. "This is a trap," she whispered, throwing herself over the printer to stop the avalanche of contracts flying everywhere. Meanwhile, Thomas was walking by and saw the scene. Alice, practically hugging the copier, was covered in papers and holding a stapler like a self-defense weapon. "Why am I not surprised?" Thomas muttered, unable to hide his smile. He stood there for a moment, just watching. Alice was like a tiny, unstoppable hurricane, completely out of place in a world of neatly pressed suits and serious faces. And for some strange reason, watching her was becoming addictive. "Mr. Miller." Alice noticed him and immediately tried to stand up, only to trip over her shoelace and face-plant onto the floor. Thomas sighed. "Alice, have you ever considered working for a demolition company?" he asked, offering her a hand. "That could be my backup plan," she grinned. He hesitated, then said, "I have an off-site meeting. Come with me." "Me? Why?" "Because if I leave you alone for more than 15 minutes, you might actually bring the whole building down. I'd rather keep you under surveillance." Alice laughed, grabbed her oversized backpack, and hopped into the luxury car. Thomas, watching her, realized something. This didn't make sense, but it made a difference. Alice sat with a small succulent pod on her lap, gently stroking its leaves. "Plants need to breathe," she explained when Thomas gave it a curious glance. Up front, the driver, impeccably dressed in white gloves, kept his expression neutral, as if chauffeuring a passenger carrying a plant and a lunchbox was an everyday occurrence. "Are we heading to some fancy restaurant?" Alice asked. "Something like that," Thomas replied vaguely. Minutes later, Alice found herself seated at a table so elegant she felt like even breathing too hard might knock over the silverware. Across from her, Thomas was focused on his tablet, flipping through documents while a waiter handed her a menu written entirely in French. Alice squinted at the menu. "That's a lot of vowels for so little food," she muttered. "Is this a dish or a Wi-Fi password?" Thomas looked up, amused. "Just order whatever you want. You don't need to pick something fancy." "Do they have koya?" she asked seriously. Thomas choked on his water. "Probably not." "That's fine. I adapt. Adaptation is my middle name. Well, actually, it's my third. My second is Disaster. Alice Disaster Adaptation Silva. Nice to meet you." She extended her hand as if introducing herself for the first time. Thomas shook her hand but just smiled, shaking his head slightly. "Why did you take this job?" he asked suddenly. Alice set the menu down. "To be honest, I just wanted to deliver the letter and go home. But then you hired me, and well, who am I to turn down a job like this?" Even after everything that happened? You almost ruined the company's event. Oh, but it was fun, she grinned. And look at that, you're smiling. Mission accomplished. Thomas went quiet for a moment. She was right. He had been smiling more and more since Alice appeared. It didn't make sense. He was known as the most serious and cold CEO in the city. And yet, here he was, laughing because of a girl who barely knew how to use a printer. Alice leaned in, studying him. Why are you so stiff? Stiff? Thomas raised an eyebrow. Yes. You walk straight, talk straight, even breathe straight. It's like someone hit the executive mode button and forgot to turn it off. You laugh so little. I bet you charge a tax on laughter. Thomas tried to hold back a laugh, but failed. I guess I just got used to it. I could never, Alice declared. My life is a soap opera. If I walk too straight, I trip over my own emotions. Dinner continued with unexpected questions and honest answers. Alice talked about her childhood in the village, her mentor, and her many failed attempts at normal jobs, including the time she mistook a flip-flop for a steak and fried it. Thomas, in turn, spoke about the pressures of inheriting the family business, growing up surrounded by expectations, and how, deep down, he couldn't even remember what his real dream was. And what was it? Alice asked, leaning forward. Without thinking, Thomas answered, I wanted to be a pianist. Alice blinked, surprised. Asterisk you asterisk? But you look like you were born wearing a tie. He chuckled. I know, but I guess everyone has a hidden side. Alice smiled. I like this hidden side. Let's find it. The next morning, Alice showed up at the office carrying a box of koyas and a thermos full of tea. She waltzed into Thomas's office without knocking. Formalities weren't really her thing. Coffee is old news. Now it's tea with koya, she announced, holding out the tray. Thomas took a koya like it was a challenge. He bit into it, chewed, and then laughed. Alice pumped a fist in the air. See, I knew you liked living dangerously. Just then, Thomas's phone rang. His expression turned serious. It's about the international partnership contract. The meeting got moved up. I need to review this now. Alice grabbed a thick folder from his desk and flipped through it, her eyes widening. Wow, this looks like the label of a giant medicine bottle. Thomas looked at her, then at the documents, then finally at the koya in his hand. Want to help? He asked, half joking. Me? Get in your way? Absolutely. She dropped her backpack and plopped down beside him. The afternoon passed with Thomas explaining complex terms and Alice translating them into normal people language. Between reviewing contracts, they laughed, fought over the last koya, and debated whether chamomile tea was a valid corporate stress reliever. And just like that, without realizing it, Thomas started to enjoy Alice's presence more than he should. Meanwhile, in the company hallways, rumors were flying. The clumsy girl who had stumbled into the company was now the hot topic of the day. Some thought she was Thomas's long-lost relative. Others suspected she was an undercover spy. The only certainty? No one had ever seen Thomas Miller like this, laughing in the middle of the workday. And Alice. She was just being herself. No filters, no disguises, no fear of being the misplaced puzzle piece. Maybe that was exactly what Thomas needed. Thomas replied, the corner of his mouth hinting at a smile. Throughout the week, Natasha showed up every single day with increasingly absurd excuses. First, to return a forgotten shirt, then to discuss an old contract. By the third day, she claimed she wanted to donate a vase to the office. Alice, noticing Natasha's persistence, decided to take a different approach. Every time Natasha appeared, Alice gave herself an impressive-sounding job title. Alice, can you grab the sales reports? Thomas asked. With Natasha in the room, Alice responded loudly. Of course, boss. I'll grab the reports, review the international contracts, and coordinate the investor meeting with the Arab partners. Just a moment. Natasha narrowed her eyes. The next day, Thomas asked, Alice, can you take this to reception? Alice grinned. Absolutely. Right after I finish reviewing the quarterly financial statements and checking the export charts for the European market. Natasha turned red. By Friday, she had had enough. She called Alice for a private meeting at the building's cafe. Alice arrived prepared, with her backpack, a snack, and a whole lot of confidence. "Listen, girl," Natasha began, taking off her sunglasses. "I don't know what you're trying to do, but it won't work. Thomas is out of your league. He doesn't go for real women?" Alice interrupted, taking a big bite of her snack. "Relax, Nat. I'm not trying anything. I'm just existing." "Well, stop existing near him," Natasha snapped. Alice wiped her fingers and smiled. "That's not up to me. He hired me. And if it makes you feel any better, I also thought I'd be fired on my second day. But look at that, still here, still standing, still enjoying my snack." Natasha stomped away. Alice returned to her makeshift desk with one certainty. This office would never be the same again. And Thomas, well, the more Natasha tried to push Alice away, the more he realized he didn't want her to leave. Somehow, the girl who tripped over cables and knocked over files was turning his world upside down, and strangely enough, he liked it. That Monday, Alice arrived as if preparing for battle. Along with her usual snacks and her notebook of brilliant ideas, she brought a tray of homemade chocolates to build corporate alliances. It was a sophisticated strategy, or at least it was in her mind. "Good morning, corporate world," she announced, handing out chocolates like the Easter Bunny. The employees, already used to her antics, accepted the treats with a mix of gratitude and fear for whatever she might do next. Meanwhile, in the executive offices, Natasha wasn't feeling so sweet. After her talk with Alice, she decided it was time to act. If Thomas liked chaos, she'd give him a dose of carefully planned chaos, the kind that could ruin reputations. By mid-morning, Alice was called into Thomas's office. She walked in as usual, without knocking, her coat tangled in her backpack strap, accidentally knocking over the secretary's water cup on the way in. "You called, boss," she smiled. Thomas sighed. At this point, it was almost endearing. "We need to review these reports before this afternoon's meeting," he said, pointing to a pile of documents. Alice pulled up a chair beside him, but sat down too hard, causing one of the wheels to slip, sending her sliding backward like she was surfing on the carpet. "I'm fine," she shouted, already scrambling back into position. Thomas pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to suppress a laugh. "How do you manage to turn every simple task into a comedy scene?" "Natural talent," she shrugged, grabbing the reports. While they worked together, Natasha put her plan into action. Using her internal connections, she spread a rumor among some executives that Alice had joined the company with ulterior motives, getting close to Thomas out of self-interest. By lunchtime, people were already whispering that Alice was a gold digger and that Thomas was falling right into her trap. Alice, unaware of the gossip, was too busy trying to understand what consolidated cash flow meant. "Thomas, can I make a suggestion?" she asked. "That scares me, but go ahead. Why don't you guys write these reports in normal people's language? Instead of analysis of liabilities and assets, it could just be how much we spent on useful stuff and how much we wasted on nonsense." Oddly enough, that made sense. Their growing closeness was becoming more obvious. Thomas, who used to stay locked in his office, now insisted on reviewing everything alongside Alice, even knowing she would turn every meeting into an improv show. But as they grew closer, the walls around her were closing in. The next afternoon, Alice was called into the compliance department, a word she could barely pronounce. "Alice Silva, correct?" asked a woman with square glasses and a serious expression. "That's me. Employee of the month for tripping over things and champion of spilling coffee." "We are investigating an anonymous complaint," the woman continued, ignoring the humor. "Someone claimed that you used privileged information and personal connections to get your job, with the intention of pursuing a relationship with the CEO. Alice blinked. "Excuse me, what?" "We have an email stating that your hiring was irregular and that there are signs of, let's say, romantic interests involved." Alice let out a nervous laugh. "This has to be a joke. Look at me. I can barely operate the coffee machine, let alone manipulate a billionaire." The woman didn't laugh. "We need you to fill out this form explaining your background and how you got this position." Alice took the paper and left the room, feeling her heartbeat in her ears. "Who would do something like this?" she muttered. Thomas found out about the complaint minutes later. By the time Alice entered his office to hand over the documents, he was already waiting. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked bluntly. I barely had time to process it." Alice dropped her bag. "I thought it was some kind of HR prank, like a psychological endurance test." "This isn't a joke. Someone is trying to take you down." Thomas crossed his arms. "And I bet my entire stash of cheese puffs I know exactly who it is," Alice grumbled. Thomas closed his eyes. "Natasha. Bingo. She's trying to turn me into the villain of this corporate soap opera." Thomas stayed silent. A part of him knew Natasha was capable of anything, but another part of him knew that if he didn't step in, Alice wouldn't survive the cutthroat office politics. "Come with me," he said, grabbing his suit jacket. "Where are we going?" "To fix this. The right way." Thomas and Alice stormed into a board meeting where Natasha was conveniently present. Alice walked in with confidence, but immediately tripped over the carpet, only to be caught by Thomas at the last second. "I've mastered the art of the dramatic entrance," she whispered. Thomas faced the board. "Who received the complaint about Alice?" The compliance officer raised her hand. "I did." "Great. Let's make it official right here. I was the one who hired Alice. No hidden agendas, no secret plans. I asked her to work here because she brings something no one else does: honesty and humanity." Alice, who had been nervously sipping water, choked. What?" she coughed. "That's right. Since you got here, you're the only person who talks to me like I'm a normal human being. That's rare around here." The board members murmured among themselves. Natasha crossed her arms, her face burning with anger. And lastly, Thomas looked straight at Natasha. "If anyone here thinks they can use gossip to ruin an innocent employee's reputation, they are deeply mistaken." Alice gave Natasha a small wave, as if blowing a kiss after the meeting. Then she and Thomas headed back to his office. As soon as they arrived, Alice flopped onto the couch, completely drained. "You defended me. That was kind of epic," she said. "I just told the truth." Thomas replied simply. Alice glanced at him, a bit hesitant. "And that part about me being honest and human, was that a compliment or just a polite way of saying I'm a total mess?" Thomas smirked. "A little of both." Alice threw a pillow at him. "I'll take it." That night, Thomas offered Alice a ride home, but instead of dropping her off, he pulled up at a lively park. "What are we doing here?" Alice asked, confused. "You said you wanted to help me remember who I am outside the office. So here we are." Alice grinned and tugged him toward a popcorn stand. "I want to see the most feared CEO in town buy popcorn with grated cheese," she challenged. Thomas accepted. Between popcorn, cotton candy, and a paddleboat ride, they forgot about titles, gossip, and corporate stress, just for a while. Under the park's glowing lights, Alice saw Thomas Miller, the cold billionaire, as just a man who had never been allowed to be normal. And Thomas realized Alice wasn't a storm to control. She was the kind of storm he needed to wake up. And maybe, just maybe, neither of them wanted to escape it. The next morning, Alice arrived at the office carrying a massive box, so big it looked like she was moving in. The box was practically bigger than her, making every step a balancing act. "Need some help?" the security guard asked. "No thanks, just carrying my dignity and a few other things," Alice huffed, just before tripping over the reception rug and spilling everything onto the floor. Inside the box, a portable coffee maker, because she still didn't trust the office machine, a cheese bread-shaped pillow, and a small pink fan. The receptionist sighed, already used to Alice's antics. "And she continues her mission to turn the executive floor into a college dorm," she murmured as Alice arranged her desk. Meanwhile, on the other side of the building, Natasha was fine-tuning her next plan. If the last rumor hadn't taken Alice down, she needed something bigger, something Alice wouldn't see coming, something Thomas couldn't undo. Natasha didn't play to lose. At lunchtime, Thomas invited Alice out to eat. But to him, eating out meant a fancy restaurant with glass walls, waiters with French accents, and live piano music. Alice stepped inside and immediately felt out of place. The chairs looked like art pieces. The glasses were polished to a mirror shine, and even the water had a floating lemon slice, like a spa for cups. "I should have packed lunch," she muttered. Relax, no one is judging you, Thomas assured her. But Alice was already flustered. She tried to pull out her chair and dropped her napkin. Then, she attempted to order in French, but accidentally asked for a roasted duck that tasted like a chair. Impressive how you turn any lunch into pure entertainment, Thomas said, amused. Alice laughed, but she noticed people at nearby tables, sneaking glances their way. Why does it feel like we're a spectacle? Thomas glanced around and sighed. Because we are. Ever since that rumor started, everyone wants to know who the mysterious girl is that supposedly won me over. Alice nearly choked on her lemon water. Won you over? I haven't even won over my own cat. He only tolerates me because I feed him. Thomas actually laughed. Relax, let's just eat. The world can wait. While they enjoyed their meal, Natasha made her final move. She convinced a journalist friend to snap photos of them and twist the story. The gossip site published a headline, Cold CEO Tamed by Mysterious Girl. Who is the new woman in Thomas Miller's heart? Alice had no idea she was about to go viral. Again, that afternoon, when they returned to the office, Alice noticed people whispering, sharing links, and giggling. What's going on? She asked the office intern. You're trending, boss, he said, showing her his phone. There she was, mid-bite, fork in the air, caught in what had to be the most awkwardly timed photo ever. Next to her, Thomas was actually smiling, a rare sight, and the headline blared, The clumsy girl who won over the coldest CEO in town. I'm going to be sick, Alice groaned. Thomas saw the article at the same time and stormed into Alice's office, phone in hand, looking both irritated and embarrassed. Alice, what is this? I swear I had nothing to do with it. She raised her hands. My Wi-Fi is so bad, a carrier pigeon would be faster. Thomas tossed his phone onto her desk. This is Natasha's doing. Of course it is. She probably has an entire album called Foolproof Plans to Ruin Alice. And this is just volume 1. Alice muttered, rubbing her temples. I'm going to fix this, Thomas said, ready to leave. But Alice grabbed his arm. Wait, if we deny it, people will think we're hiding something. You know how the internet works. The more you deny, the more they believe. Thomas looked at her. So what do you suggest? Alice grinned mischievously. We do the opposite. We laugh at it. We act like it's the most ridiculous thing in the world, because it is. Thomas crossed his arms, intrigued. How? Give me your phone. Alice snapped a selfie of them making silly faces. I'm posting this, she announced, typing the caption. A cold CEO and his clumsy employee taking over your timeline with this delicious gossip. Thomas looked skeptical at first, then chuckled. This might actually work. Trust me, boss. Alice winked. Within an hour, Alice's post went more viral than the original article. People loved her humor and honesty, and soon, the public was rooting for the unlikely duo, even though they weren't actually a couple. At least, not officially. By the end of the day, Thomas and Alice stayed late, reviewing documents. Well, trying to. Alice dropped the stapler 3 times and accidentally turned an important report into a paper airplane. I've never seen anyone so dedicated to being a disaster, Thomas teased. It's a gift, Alice replied, tossing a paper airplane that hit him squarely on the forehead. They laughed, and the laughter lingered longer than it should have. Then silence took over. Alice was too close. Thomas was staring too much. Suddenly, it wasn't so funny anymore. Thomas leaned in slightly, as if about to say something. Alice held her breath. The space between them shrank. Then Alice's phone rang loudly, with a blaring ringtone. Sorry, it's my mom. If I don't pick up, she'll think I've been kidnapped. Alice clutched her phone, torn between relief and frustration. Thomas adjusted his tie and stepped back. No problem, he said casually, but they both knew something almost happened outside the office. From the window, Natasha watched with narrowed eyes, frustration written all over her face. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't push Alice away. Worse, the more she tried, the closer Thomas seemed to get to that chaotic girl. If you two think you're getting a happy ending, you're very mistaken, Natasha muttered to herself. But inside, Alice and Thomas were oblivious, lost in their own world of clumsy moments, silly expressions, and flying reports. Without even realizing it, they were building something Natasha couldn't control, a real connection. And this was only the beginning. Alice arrived at the office with one goal: to have a peaceful day, or at least as peaceful as possible, given her talent for accidental chaos. She came prepared with a packed lunch, a bag of sour candies, and a roll of tape to mark off her office space, since her desk was still just that makeshift spot near the copier. "No one's ruining my mood today," she mumbled, pressing the tape to the floor like she was claiming territory. Of course, that wasn't going to last. By mid-morning, Thomas appeared at her desk with that familiar look, the one teachers had before handing back a test covered in red ink. "Something wrong, boss?" Alice asked, flashing a nervous smile. "Come with me," he said. She followed him to the most private meeting room in the office. As soon as she stepped inside, he shut the door. Alice froze. "Oh, wow. If I'd known, I would have brought my toothpaste. Always wanted to have a bright smile for a firing," she joked. "It's not that," Thomas said, but he didn't laugh. He actually looked concerned. Alice crossed her arms. "Then what is it?" "We need to talk. About us." Her eyes widened. "Us? What us? The dynamic duo of executive disasters? What about us?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically uneasy. "Since you got here, my whole routine has been flipped upside down. I used to know exactly how each day would end. Now, I don't even know how each hour will go." "Is that a bad thing?" Alice asked, biting her lip. "No. It's strange, but not bad." Alice stared at him, processing. "Thomas, are you saying you like me?" Like me?" she asked, blinking fast. He exhaled. "I'm saying you make me feel things I haven't felt in a long time." Alice was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then she suddenly yelled, "I won the bet." Thomas jumped. "What bet?" "I bet myself that deep down, you were actually a human with feelings, and that your whole corporate robot thing was just an act. I knew it. I knew it." Thomas laughed, shaking his head. "You're completely insane." "Insane is going through life without laughing, Thomas Miller. Welcome to the fun side." He looked at her differently now. This clumsy girl with a backpack bigger than herself and no filter when she spoke. She had somehow invaded his life, and now, imagining his routine without her seemed impossible. "So, does this mean you like me too?" Thomas asked, half joking, half serious. Alice scratched the back of her neck. "Well, I do like you, but my love life is like an all-you-can-eat pizza buffet. Seems like a great idea at first, but always ends with a stomach ache." "We could give it a try," Thomas suggested, stepping closer. Alice felt her face heat up. "Try what?" "A real date. No contracts, no snack breaks in the middle of reports. Just the two of us." Alice turned red, but before she could respond, the office door swung open. "Oh, am I interrupting something?" Natasha's voice dripped with amusement as she leaned against the doorframe, her signature sly smile in place. Alice nearly jumped. "No, of course not. We were just rehearsing a corporate training skit. I was the unhappy customer, and he was the salesperson trying to convince me to buy a toaster. Training stuff." She made it up on the spot. Thomas closed his eyes for a second, holding back a sigh. Natasha raised an eyebrow. "Right. Well, I actually came to bring this." She held up an envelope. "It's about the merger contract with a European company. We need to review it before tomorrow's meeting." Thomas took the envelope, and Natasha gave Alice one last glance before turning on her heel and walking away. As soon as she was out of earshot, Alice whispered, "She's like the final boss in a video game. The further we get, the harder she becomes." That afternoon, Thomas had an off-site meeting, leaving Alice alone in the office. Alice was left to review a presentation on her own, with no one looking over her shoulder. She put on some soft background music, popped open a soda, and got to work. Her graphs had fun titles like "Money Coming in Yay" and "Money Going Out Ouch My Wallet." Meanwhile, Natasha had other plans. She had bribed an IT employee with concert tickets to access Alice's computer. From Alice's email, she sent a disastrous message to their European supplier, filled with negotiation blunders, absurd promises, and even an offer of personalized gifts and relaxing massages to close the deal. The goal: frame Alice, destroy her credibility, and make sure she was deemed unfit for any serious role, especially a place in Thomas's heart. By the end of the day, chaos erupted. Thomas returned from a meeting to find the legal team in his office, the international relations director in tears, and the European supplier furious, threatening to cut ties. "What happened?" Thomas asked. "Alice sent a completely inappropriate email to our biggest supplier," someone shouted. Thomas frowned. "That doesn't make sense. Alice barely knows how to format an email, let alone handle an international negotiation." Alice walked in, chewing gum and carrying a bag of cheese bread. She noticed the tense atmosphere and hesitated. "Oh, bad timing." Thomas handed her the printed email. "Did you send this?" Alice scanned the message and burst into laughter. "Okay, I might be a little crazy, but I'm not stupid. I don't even know what a logistics reciprocity clause is. This is a setup." Natasha stepped forward, pretending to be concerned. "What an unfortunate situation. I did warn you that hiring someone inexperienced could lead to something like this." Alice narrowed her eyes. "Oh, Nat, you've got some venom on your hands there." Thomas looked between the two women, and something clicked in his mind. He knew his fiancée's schemes all too well. Without another word, he grabbed his phone and called the IT department. "I need to know who accessed Alice's email today." Minutes later, the answer came back. The access came from a remote computer, one registered to Natasha. "Natasha," Thomas said, his voice dangerously calm, "we have a problem." She tried to argue, but he didn't give her the chance. "Leave the building. Now." Alice watched the whole thing unfold, a mix of shock and pride on her face. "Wow. Thomas Miller, taking down corporate villains with one phone call. I applaud you." Natasha stormed out, but before leaving, she turned back with a warning. "This isn't over." Later that evening, Alice and Thomas went up to the office terrace for some fresh air. They sat side by side, sharing the bag of cheese bread. "You defended me again," Alice said, "and I'll keep doing it whenever needed," Thomas replied. Alice smiled. "You know, I thought you were just some stiff guy in a suit who never smiled, but you're actually nice. A little rigid, but nice." Thomas chuckled. "And I thought you were just a clumsy intruder, but you're one of a kind." He looked at her in a way that made Alice forget how to chew. A comfortable silence settled between them until Alice finally spoke. "I've never had a boss stand up for me before. I just wanted to say thank you." Thomas stepped closer. "And I've never had an employee remind me how good it feels to laugh." They were so close that Alice could smell his cologne. When Thomas leaned in, she closed her eyes. This time, no one interrupted. It was a brief kiss, sweet, a little awkward, but absolutely perfect. "Does this count as a salary bonus?" Alice teased, laughing. "Consider it part of your training," Thomas replied with a smirk. There, under the city sky, Alice and Thomas proved that chaos and order could, in fact, work together. The next morning, Alice arrived at the office with a smile that wouldn't leave her face. The rooftop kiss was impossible to forget. She replayed it at least 30 times before falling asleep, and another 15 times while brushing her teeth. "Good morning, beautiful building. Good morning, wall. Good morning, coffee maker that hates me," she hummed as she floated down the hallway like the lead in a musical. But as always, Alice's life wasn't just filled with dreamy moments. The second she stepped into Thomas's office, she almost knocked over the glass door and came face to face with Mr. Miller Sr. "Good morning, father, Mr. Miller," she stammered. Thomas's father, a gray-haired man with a look that suggested he had never laughed at a joke in his life, examined her from head to toe. "Who is this?" he asked, as if Alice were some strange corporate species. "Father, this is Alice," Thomas said calmly. "She works for me." Alice stepped forward, offering a handshake. "Nice to meet you. Alice Disaster Silva, ninja messenger, expert in tripping over things, and currently your son's girlfriend in training." Thomas's eyes widened. He coughed, trying to recover, but the damage was done. "Girlfriend?" Mr. Miller's tone was so sharp it could probably be heard on the floor below. "She's exaggerating," Thomas said quickly. "I'm not exaggerating. We kissed yesterday on the rooftop, under the moon, with the neighbor's pagoda music playing in the background. It was beautiful," Alice added, grinning. Mr. Miller went pale. "Thomas, I need to speak with you. Now. Alone." Alice raised her hand. "I can leave, no problem. I'll just go print some papers, and maybe accidentally break the copier. No big deal." She backed away, bumped into the doorframe, and disappeared down the hall. Alice spent the entire morning avoiding Thomas's office, imagining the scolding he was getting. Meanwhile, Thomas faced a full-blown interrogation. "Explain this to me," his father demanded, pointing at the door Alice had exited through. "Who is that girl?" "I already told you. She works here." "And why, exactly, are you kissing employees on the rooftop?" "Because I like her," Thomas said simply. His father rubbed his temples, like he had just heard the most absurd thing ever. "Thomas, do you understand what this could cause? The shareholders, the press, the rumors." "I know," Thomas interrupted, "but for the first time in years, I don't care." Thomas's father stared at him, like he had just announced he was quitting everything to sell jewelry on the beach. "Do you even realize the responsibility you carry? Your image? Your reputation?" his father asked. Thomas met his gaze, unwavering. "And what good is a perfect reputation if I feel empty?" he shot back. His father was speechless, not because he agreed, but because he had never seen his son so resolute, so emotional. Meanwhile, completely unaware that she had sparked this intense conversation, Alice was hiding in the cafeteria, pushing macaroni and sausage around on her tray. She tried to keep a low profile, but that plan failed fast when the marketing team swooped in, buzzing with curiosity. "So it's official? You and the boss?" the social media manager asked, practically glowing with excitement. Alice shrugged. "We're testing the waters. Think of it as an emotional test drive. It could work out, or crash straight into a wall." The IT intern sighed dramatically. "This is the biggest plot twist in this office since they changed the coffee brand." Alice laughed, but deep down, her stomach twisted with nerves. Now that everyone knew, the pressure was only going to build, and she wasn't exactly a pro at relationships, especially not with billionaire bosses. Later that day, Thomas called Alice to his office. The moment she stepped inside, she could tell something was off. "Everything okay?" she asked, already biting into a cookie out of habit. Thomas exhaled heavily. "My father didn't take the idea of us very well." "Yeah, I figured," Alice said, shrugging. "If I told my mom I was dating a billionaire, she'd probably tell me to ask for an emotional loan." Thomas let out a reluctant chuckle. The problem is, in his eyes, workplace relationships always end in scandal. "Oh sure, because I'm just known for scandals," Alice quipped. "One time, I almost caused one at the grocery store, but that was just because I knocked over a pyramid of canned corn. Not sure if that counts." Thomas took her hand. "I just want to make sure you're ready for this." Alice took a deep breath. "Thomas, I have never been prepared for anything in my life. I stumble, I get up, I laugh, and I move on. If this works out, great. If not, at least I'll have a wild story to tell at the next family bingo night." Thomas smiled. "That's exactly why I like you so much." While the couple was figuring things out, Natasha hadn't given up. After being kicked out of the company, she started reaching out to journalists, painting Alice as a manipulative scammer who was using Thomas to climb the corporate ladder. That night, a sensationalist article popped up, "Corporate Cinderella. Clumsy girl or master manipulator?" Alice was brushing her teeth when she saw it and nearly choked on her toothpaste. "Can I not have a moment of peace?" she yelled at her phone screen. The next morning, Thomas called a surprise press conference. Every major media outlet showed up, expecting some big corporate announcement. Instead, they found Thomas standing beside Alice, holding her hand. "I want to make something clear," Thomas began. "Yes, we're getting to know each other. And yes, she works at the company. But there's no hidden agenda, no scheme, no manipulation." Alice took the microphone. "I can't even manipulate my toaster at home. The other day, I almost blew up my microwave because I put aluminum foil in it. Do you really think I could manipulate a CEO? He's more stubborn than a cat on bath day." The reporters laughed. Thomas squeezed her hand. "I like Alice because she's exactly who she is, clumsiness, snacks, and all." Alice smiled. "And I like him because he lets me be myself." The press conference ended with more smiles than questions, and for the first time, Thomas Miller didn't care what the media thought. Later in the parking lot, as Alice struggled to get into the car without getting her skirt caught in the door, Thomas gently grabbed her arm. "Alice." "Yeah?" she asked, finally untangling herself. "I'm taking this seriously." She looked at him, surprised. "Me too. But my version of serious is a little messy. My life plan has always been to just make it through the next day. And now there's you." Thomas brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. "We'll figure out together." Alice smiled. "Together. But if things go south, I want the office coffee machine." "Deal." They laughed and then kissed. This time, no interruptions. No prying eyes. Just them, in a quiet corner of the parking lot, sealing a deal far more important than any corporate contract. And Natasha. She watched from a distance, fuming inside her car. "This isn't over," she muttered, digging her heel into the floor mat. But for Thomas and Alice, there was only one thing that mattered. They were finally on the same side of the chaos. The next morning, Alice arrived at work way too early, something wildly out of character for her. She was so excited that she walked through the lobby with a goofy smile, even greeting the decorative statue in the hall. "Good morning, dear building. Good morning, revolving door. Nothing can stop me today." She stepped into the elevator, humming, and hit the executive floor button with confidence. That confidence lasted exactly 3 seconds, until the doors opened, and she walked straight into Thomas and his father, Mr. Miller, in the hallway. "Oh." Alice froze mid-step, nearly tripping over her own foot. "I don't want to interrupt an important father-son billionaire meeting, so I'll just blend in over here, behind this plant." She shuffled behind a tiny decorative plant. "Alice, come in," Thomas called. "Are you sure? I'm really busy with some urgent tasks, like color-coding paper clips and coming up with names for the office printers." Thomas gave a small smile, but his expression was serious. Alice stepped inside, and the tension in the air was so thick it felt like someone had sprayed stress into the room, like an air freshener. "Here's the thing," Thomas started. "There's something you need to know." Alice's eyes widened. "Oh no, I swear. The cheese bread pillow I brought isn't contraband. It was a gift from my aunt." "It's not about that." Thomas took a deep breath. "It's about my past. And about Natasha." Alice perched on the armrest of the couch, sensing this was going to be big. "Oh, right. Revenge Barbie. Go ahead, I'm ready." Thomas hesitated, then finally said, "When Natasha and I got engaged, our marriage wasn't just about love. It was a business arrangement. Our families had a merger contract that depended on us getting married." Alice's jaw dropped. "Wait, am I in a love triangle or a Turkish soap opera?" "I never truly loved Natasha, and she knew it, but our parents pushed us so hard, I gave in, until the day I realized I couldn't spend my life trapped in something like that." "So, you broke up with her," Alice said, finishing his sentence. Thomas nodded. "On the day of the wedding rehearsal." Alice nearly choked on her own saliva. "My God, you literally left her at the altar." Thomas sighed. "I know it was cowardly. I should have ended it sooner. But the truth is the entire time I was engaged to her, something felt off. I just didn't know what. Until I met you." Alice was speechless for a few seconds. Then she chuckled. "So, she has a reason to hate me, huh?" she joked. "I'm the living symbol of the emotional freedom she never had." Thomas sighed. "I just wanted you to hear the whole story from me, not from someone else." Alice stayed quiet, taking it all in. It was a lot to process over breakfast. But deep down, she knew Thomas wasn't the kind of man to hurt someone on purpose. If life had taught her anything, it was that everyone had a messy past. All right, let's have some fun. If you're still reading, type Coca-Cola in the comments. Only the real ones will get it. Now back to the story. Alice took a deep breath. Thomas, I'm not running away. Just know that if someone tries to throw stale rice at me in the street because of this, I'll fight back with frozen cheese bread. Thomas laughed and took her hand. You're crazy, and I love that. But the ghosts of the past aren't so easy to bury. Later that morning, an anonymous email was sent to the company's top shareholders. It contained attachments, photos of Thomas and Natasha together at dinners, events, and private moments from their past engagement. The message suggested that Thomas was using Alice to clean up his public image, and that he and Natasha still had business ties. Maybe even more than that. The office atmosphere turned tense. Alice, who was just trying to figure out the coffee machine without causing a short circuit, noticed the stares. The whispers in the hallways grew louder. Did I become a meme again? She asked a marketing intern. Not exactly a meme, he replied, showing her the email. Alice read it, and her stomach dropped. It felt like someone had poured a bucket of ice water over the happiness she had been feeling. Thomas found out soon after and walked straight into her office. But before he could speak, Alice raised her hand. Before you say anything, I have one question. Is this true? No. Natasha and I have no involvement, and I would never use you to fix my image, Thomas said firmly. I want to believe you, Alice admitted. But honestly, I've never been great at trusting people. My last relationship was with a pizza delivery guy who promised to take me out to dinner and then disappeared with my change. I'm not him, Thomas replied. Alice crossed her arms. Prove it. At lunchtime, Thomas called a company-wide meeting. Everyone, from the CEO to the cleaning staff, gathered in the cafeteria. Alice sat in the back, hugging her backpack. Thomas stepped onto a makeshift stage and took a deep breath. I need to clear something up, he began. Yes, Natasha and I were engaged. And yes, I ended it in a way I'm not proud of. But that's in the past. Employees whispered among themselves. What's happening now between Alice and me is completely different. There's no business deal, no contract, no manipulation, just two people trying to figure something out together. Alice's eyes widened. She hadn't expected a public statement like that. And if anyone, inside or outside this company, thinks they can tear us apart with rumors or threats, they're wrong. It won't work. Alice has brought something to this company that no financial report ever has: humanity. The employees clapped, first hesitantly, then louder. Alice didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so she did both. That afternoon, Alice and Thomas were alone in his office. Thank you, she said. For what? For not hiding me. For not turning me into some corporate secret. For just being you. Thomas stepped closer. I'm just a guy trying to get it right with the most clumsy, amazing woman I've ever met. They kissed again, this time tasting victory and cheese bread, because Alice had one hidden in her jacket pocket. But Natasha wasn't done playing her game. While Alice and Thomas enjoyed their moment, Natasha had one last card to play. An old, forgotten clause in the merger contract between the Miller and Montgomery families. A clause that stated if Thomas broke off the engagement, his family's company would have to pay a massive fine. And Natasha was ready to collect, not for money, but for revenge. By the end of the day, Thomas received a court summons. Alice found the opened envelope on his desk. After reading it, she nearly fell over. Is this serious? It is. If I don't marry Natasha, the company could face a long lawsuit that might affect all the employees. Alice felt a knot in her chest. So, what are you going to do? Thomas looked at her. I don't know yet. But one thing is certain. I'm not going to lose you. Alice tried to smile. But this time, the humor didn't come. Because for the first time, she realized, maybe love wasn't enough to win every battle. But if there was one thing Alice had learned in life, it was that you don't take down a clumsy girl that easily, especially one in love. Alice left Thomas's office and headed straight for the bathroom. She needed to breathe. She needed to think. She needed a snack, because no one thinks straight on an empty stomach. Sitting on the toilet lid, she pulled a squish snack out of her backpack and started eating, staring at the ceiling as if waiting for divine answers. Okay, Alice, let's organize this emotional mess into bullet points, she muttered to herself. First, you're in love. That's obvious. Second, The man you love might have to marry his evil ex because of some ancient contract. Third, you're just a girl with a colorful backpack and zero experience in corporate drama. She took another bite. And fourth, this is not going to end like this. Even if I have to crash another fancy party or pretend to be a waitress again. Alice took a deep breath, brushed the crumbs off her pants, and marched back to the office with the determined look of someone who had no idea what she was about to do, but knew it was going to be something crazy. Meanwhile, the office was drowning in crisis meetings. Lawyers, shareholders, and consultants packed the room, making it feel more like a funeral than a strategy session. Every option seemed terrible. Paying the fine would destroy the company, and marrying Natasha would ruin the rest of his life. Alice walked in without knocking, as usual. "I can fix this," she declared. Thomas, exhausted, barely looked up. "Alice, now is not the time for one of your crazy ideas." "Wrong. Now is exactly the time. You're all sitting here talking about logic, contracts, and money. But this fight isn't about any of that. It's about pride. And the only way to deal with wounded pride is with something even stronger: public humiliation." The lawyers exchanged uneasy glances, like they had just witnessed a ghost appear in the conference room. "Alice," Thomas tried to intervene. "Trust me. You hired me for my chaos, remember? It's time to use it to our advantage." Thomas sighed. Trying to stop Alice was like trying to hold back a landslide with an umbrella. "What exactly are you planning?" Alice grinned. "Something so epic, so humiliating, that Natasha will never want to come near us again." That night, Alice took over the Miller Enterprises employee group chat, usually reserved for debating pizza orders. It quickly transformed into the intelligence hub for Operation Take Down Natasha. "Guys, do you trust me?" Alice asked. The responses were a mix of no and explosion emojis. "Perfect. Now help me. I need videos, audio. Anything embarrassing Natasha has ever done or said while working here. Meetings, parties, behind the scenes, everything counts." In less than 30 minutes, Alice had a goldmine. Footage of Natasha complaining about the company holiday party food. A clip of her calling a senior director a dinosaur in a suit. A video of her tripping over her skirt and spilling champagne all over her designer bag. And the crown jewel, an audio recording where she laughed and admitted she only got engaged to Thomas to be on a magazine cover. Alice smirked. "Now, we just wait for the perfect moment." The next day, at the mediation meeting with lawyers and family representatives, Natasha was already gloating, thinking she had won. That was, until Alice strolled in, wearing a cap and sunglasses like a low-budget spy. "What is she doing here?" Natasha scoffed. "Moral support and snack delivery." Alice waved a bag of chips. The lawyers began reading the disputed contract clause. Natasha's smirk grew. Then Alice raised her hand. "Excuse me, can I share something real quick?" "Alice," Thomas warned, but it was too late. She plugged her phone into the big screen and hit play. The clips rolled one by one. Natasha stumbling, Natasha whining about food, Natasha calling a director old, and finally, the recording where she admitted she never loved Thomas and only wanted the fame. The silence was deafening. Natasha's breathing grew heavy. This is an invasion of privacy." Natasha shouted. Alice crossed her arms. "Oh, that's funny. Because when you spread rumors about me, that was fine. Double standard, sweetheart." The Miller family's lawyers, who had secretly disliked Natasha for years, struggled to hide their smiles. One of them cleared his throat. "I think this changes the negotiation." Thomas grabbed Alice's arm and led her out of the room. "I can't believe you did that. I know it was a little sneaky, but it worked. She has no credibility now. If she goes to the press, she'll only embarrass herself." Thomas looked at Alice, unsure whether to laugh, argue, or kiss her. "You're unbelievable. And you knew that from day one. So really, this is on you." Alice shrugged. Thomas pulled her in and kissed her, right there in the hallway. Lawyers, employees, even a cafe worker pushing a snack cart, witnessed it. "Was that a scene from a movie?" the cafe worker asked. "Nope. Just a normal day with Alice," Thomas replied with a grin. With Natasha out of the picture, The contract clause was reevaluated. Turns out, marriage had never been a real requirement, just a dramatic misunderstanding by their families. And just like that, the $1 million problem disappeared. Alice became a company legend. The group chat was renamed Alice's Guardians, and she even received a special badge, Queen of Corporate Chaos. That night, Thomas and Alice went out, not to a fancy restaurant, but to a food truck selling pastries and sugarcane juice. I still can't believe you solved a legal dispute with gossip videos. Thomas laughed. I told you, chaos is my specialty. Alice smirked. Thomas took her hand. So, what's your next big plan? Alice thought for a second. Maybe moving in with you? I know it's soon, but... Yes. Thomas answered before she could finish. Really? Just like that? Alice, after everything we've been through, do you really think I'd let you go? She smiled. All right, but on one condition. What is it? We get a hammock for the living room. And a snack machine. I have standards. Deal. They toasted with sugarcane juice and kissed under the city lights, while a nearby food stand played a classic 90s love song. Because in the end, their love was exactly that, a mix of chaos, humor, and honesty. And honestly, it was perfect just the way it was. For the first time in ages, Miller Enterprises was peaceful. Well, as peaceful as it could be with Alice around. Employees greeted her like a celebrity, left small gifts on her desk, and even asked for advice on using embarrassing videos to solve workplace conflicts. Thomas had never been this relaxed, or this happy. I didn't know work could be this fun, he said as Alice tried to shake a stuck snack from the vending machine. Laughter is important, Thomas. A happy workplace is the difference between success and indigestion, she replied, tapping the glass. But over the next few days, something changed. Every time Thomas looked at Alice, he felt something new, a nervous excitement, like he was about to make the most important decision of his life. And this time, it was entirely his choice. That's when he knew. It was time to propose. But a simple proposal wouldn't do. Not for Alice. Thomas spent 3 sleepless nights crafting the perfect plan. Thomas wanted the perfect way to express his feelings, but nothing felt quite right. A fancy dinner? Fireworks? A giant billboard? None of it fit. Then he had an idea. One morning, Alice arrived at the office to find a trail of colorful sticky notes leading down the hallway. Each note had a little message. For the girl who turned the conference room into a dance floor. For the employee who made the coffee station the official gossip hub. For the only person who knocked over 2 office lamps and still got promoted. Alice picked up each note, laughing and growing more curious with every step. The trail led to Thomas's office door. When she opened it, she gasped. The entire room was filled with trays of her favorite snacks, arranged in the shape of a giant heart on his desk. Is this a declaration of love or an attempt to fatten me up so I can't run away? She teased, her eyes sparkling. Thomas, dressed in a suit, but without a tie, grinned in that goofy way only she could bring out of him. Both, he admitted. Then, right in the middle of the coccynias, he got down on one knee. Alice's eyes widened. You've got to be kidding. I've never been more serious, Thomas said. Alice Silva, you came into my life like a clumsy hurricane, barging into my company, messing up my office, spilling half my coffee supply. And still, you made me happier than I ever imagined. Alice was already tearing up as she nibbled on a coccynia. You taught me that life doesn't have to be perfectly planned and controlled. Sometimes it's funny, chaotic, and full of coccynia crumbs on the floor. He opened a small box, revealing a simple gold ring with a tiny colorful stone, the same shade as Alice's backpack. Will you marry me? He asked nervously. Alice leaped into the middle of the coccynias, hugging Thomas so tightly she nearly knocked him over. 1,000 times yes. But only if you promise there'll be more of these at the wedding. Deal, he laughed, kissing her. The wedding was planned in record time because Alice wanted something simple and fun. No red carpets, no designer dresses. Just upbeat music, a 2-tier cake filled with dulce de leche, and a dance floor where even Thomas's great-aunt could show off some moves. The ceremony took place outdoors in a garden filled with colorful lights and tables decorated with mixed flowers, because Alice could never pick just one. Thomas, in a light-colored suit and an awestruck smile, waited at the altar. Alice walked down the aisle to an acoustic version of a pagoda song, her special request. Her dress was light, with simple lace, and she had to fix the hem with hot glue because every seamstress in town already knew her track record with sewing machines. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the way Thomas looked at Alice, as if she was the most precious thing in the world, and the way Alice looked at him, as if she still couldn't believe she had won the heart of the smart, serious guy she once mistook for an office assistant. When the officiant asked if Alice took Thomas as her husband, she grabbed the microphone. "Before I say yes, I just want to say, I never thought this would happen. I've always been the girl who misses the bus, spills ice cream on her own pants, and shows up late on her first day of work. But you looked at me like no one ever has. Even when I fell on my knees in your office." She laughed. "Even when I knocked over your company's banner. Even when I made you eat cold coccinelles. So yes, I do. I do want to make a mess of your life every single day until we're old and fighting over the remote." Thomas chuckled, taking the microphone. "I want to say something too." Alice gestured for him to go ahead. "I spent my whole life planning every step, every decision, every minute, until you came along and showed me that the best things in life happen when nothing goes as planned. I love you just the way you are, with coccinelles in your pocket, a colorful backpack, and all the clumsy moments still to come. So yes, I do. I do want to laugh with you every day, even when life tries to knock us down." The guests cheered, some teary-eyed. Then they kissed, a kiss filled with humor, love, and perfectly imperfect promises. The reception was a mix of romance and chaos. Alice kicked off the dancing with a samba-funk mashup, while Thomas awkwardly tried to keep up. They cut the cake with a cheese bread spatula, a gift from an employee, and toasted with soda straight from the bottle. At the end of the night, Alice kicked off her shoes, climbed onto a chair, and shouted, "Ladies and gentlemen, from this day forward, I officially declare this marriage." Before she could finish, she slipped. Thomas caught her midair, just like in a romantic comedy. "Our way," she finished, laughing. And that's how Alice and Thomas's wedding ended. No perfection, no fuss, just pure joy, a whole lot of love, and of course, plenty of coccinelles. What did you think of their story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate this love story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and check out more heartwarming tales by clicking here on the final screen.